Motherhood has a way of exposing wounds you didn't even know you had. When a toddler throws a tantrum in a grocery store, or when your baby won't stop crying at 2 a.m., and you react in strangely disproportionate ways. And yet, here's the shocking part. It's in that fragile place, your hidden breaking point, where you feel that deep ache you didn't even know was there, that God begins his most surprising work of healing. I know because I've lived it. And yet, it was in those moments of despair that he met me with his grace, the daily manna I needed for that moment. Not all at once, but just enough for that day. And then the next day. Until now, looking back, I'm so much further in sanctification than I was years ago. And yet, he has even more grace. Through motherhood, God took my trauma and began reshaping it into peace, joy, and a kind of healing that I didn't think was possible, and I didn't even know was needed until I became a mother. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how God heals trauma through motherhood in 4 profound ways. We'll talk about the surprising places that he shows up and why your weak moments are exactly where his strength grows. Motherhood isn't just feeding, diapering, and cuddling your little ones. It's spiritual warfare and sanctification all wrapped into one. And right now, so many Christian mothers are walking through their days carrying not only the weight of mothering and discipling their children, but the weight of unhealed wounds too. Trauma that was never dealt with. Stories that are waiting to be redeemed. Those wounds don't just stay hidden. They spill out into our marriages, our homes, even our mothering. But here's the good news. God doesn't waste your pain. He uses the very circumstances you would never choose to draw out the brokenness so that he can heal it. I was a miserable Christian mother, wondering if this is all life had to offer. And then God began showing me another way. So if you're a Christian mother who's feeling the weight of this too, and you're longing to be the peaceful mother and wife you've always imagined without turning to expensive therapy or supplements or constantly decluttering your home so that you feel better, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. And if you're new here, I'm Kiri, and I help Christian homemakers who are living in a fog of exhaustion and stress to become the patient, peaceful mother and wife they've always dreamt of being. And if you're wondering how I went from barely surviving each day to creating a peaceful, joyful home, even when my circumstances didn't change, I actually walk through that exact process I followed in my free workshop. You can sign up using the link below. First, God heals trauma through motherhood by rewriting attachment and breaking generational patterns. My life started with trauma. My biological mom was a heroin addict, and I was found abandoned on the streets of Seattle in a soggy diaper when I was 1 year old. This was followed by foster care, and with that came more abuse, and eventually I was adopted by loving parents. But inside, I was still broken. Even in safety, I carried anxiety like an open wound, and a piece of me felt like it was missing. That missing piece showed up everywhere, in my friendships and dating, even in marriage. I struggled to trust that those who I loved most would stick around. Not that I could name that fear at the time, but it showed up in different ways. Deep down, losing my mother left me waiting for everyone else to leave too, and sometimes trying to beat them to the punch by kind of driving them away. And when I became a mother, that wound didn't disappear. If anything, it became sharper. I didn't fear that I wouldn't bond with my children, but that my love itself was too intense, so fierce that it felt terrifying, almost unbearable. Psychologists would call this a form of, I think it's like hypervigilant attachment anxiety. When early abandonment or loss teaches you that closeness is unsafe, even the deepest love can start to feel threatening. Deep down, I was afraid that loving my children so fully could lead to loss, rejection, or failure, the same way that I had felt abandoned as a child. Sometimes my children's needs felt too overwhelming, like too much for me to carry, because deep down, I feared that if I let myself fully love or fully respond, I might fail them or somehow lose them, just like I had felt abandoned as a child. But here's the grace. God didn't leave me in that place. In motherhood, he began rewriting my attachment and breaking generational patterns. As I bonded with my children through eye contact, through comforting them, through delighting in them, he was simultaneously restoring me, showing me what steadfast and secure love truly feels like. Psalm 27:10 says, "For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in." That's exactly what he did. He took me in. He showed me that love doesn't always leave, that nurture doesn't abandon, and that he himself is the safest parent of all. So as God began reparenting me through my children, I realized that the very wounds I carried didn't have to define the next generation. Where trauma may have been handed down, motherhood became the place God empowered me to stop that pattern. Every time I recognized fear or anxiety or insecurity that had been passed down to me, I had a choice. I could repeat it or respond differently. Through conscious attention, prayer, and God's guidance, I could offer my children a new inheritance, a legacy of peace instead of fear, of love instead of shame. Motherhood became the place where generational trauma met God's transformative grace. But this transformation of anxiety and fear into calm, intentional love, it did completely change my life. But it wasn't just one change. It was an entire system of rewiring my habits, my responses, and even the way that I think. I had to completely change the entire landscape of my brain, and I had to get out of fight or flight by calming my nervous system. And that's the exact system that I walk through step by step in my free workshop. So if you're resonating with this and you would like to learn this system too, you can sign up using the link below. It's the first link in my description. Trauma doesn't always look like panic attacks. Sometimes it shows up in moments that terrify you, like sudden, unexplainable anger toward your child. I never expected motherhood to bring rage out of me. Like, it was so confusing to me, so shocking to me, but I found myself snapping, yelling, slamming doors, and I had this anger that scared me sometimes, and it would come at the most bizarre times. For example, when I would put the shoes on my child and he would reach up and touch my chest, I would instantly lose my mind, and both of us would be shocked. I still don't know why I did that, but I know that for whatever reason, I was triggered and I was sent into a trauma response. Anxiety and mom anger are connected. Anxiety is the fear of losing control, and when that fear boils over, it can erupt as an emotional outburst of anger. And scripture tells us 365 times not to fear, once for every day of the year. Isn't that beautiful? But here's the truth. You don't need coping strategies for anxiety. You need actual freedom. And for me, that freedom began when the Lord showed me that healing wasn't instant. It was daily. God used practical tools paired with his word to retrain my brain so that I wasn't just coping, I was learning to respond differently to triggers. And here's the beautiful thing. The very moments that once sent me spiraling slowly became opportunities to retrain my brain. Instead of panicking or disassociating, I began practicing regulation, prayer, and grounding myself in him. Slowly, my nervous system started to relax and my brain was literally changing. It was through co-regulation with my children, rocking my distressed baby through a colicky night, holding my toddler through a tantrum, and simply being physically present with my children that taught me something profound. My body could learn safety and nurture all over again. Those moments, those gentle touches, the cuddles, the bedtime rituals were rewiring my nervous system. The fear that I carried from the past just started to slowly loosen its grip. And through consistent presence, I experienced God's love in my own body, and in turn, my children felt it too. That's what transformation looks like. The rage that once consumed me became gentleness. The triggers that once felt like death became doorways into my healing, all through motherhood. Healing doesn't come from controlling your outcomes. It comes from surrendering to the Lord in whatever circumstances he places you in. All right, so I have a little bit of a lighter story. And it's about when we recently moved to Idaho. And I knew that us moving to Idaho was the Lord's will. And I didn't think it would be easy, but I didn't realize how difficult it would be. And I underestimated how homesick I would feel. I think because we were so clearly convicted that this was the right choice, I assumed that the process would just kind of be smooth. And I didn't anticipate the depth of discomfort that I would feel. And so here's the thing, just because God calls you to something doesn't make it easy. In fact, the obedient choice often brings more discomfort initially. But in that discomfort is where the blessing lies. So there was a gal who came to my house. I've talked about her many times on my channel before, but she came to pick up moving boxes. And we talked about the move, and she just seemed to know exactly what to say. I told her how, we just felt very clear that this was God's direction for us. And she said, sometimes when God leads you somewhere, it can be pretty difficult and uncomfortable and harder than you thought, right? The fact that she named exactly what I was feeling without me even having to say it just showed her maturity and the life experience that she had carried up to that point. And it was the validation that I needed in that moment. And it was the comfort that I needed in that moment. So trust me, I'm going somewhere with this, okay? So one of the things that I was dreading most about moving to this specific house in this specific neighborhood was the neighborhood. It just felt so very, like neighborhoody. And our last house had so much more privacy. And you know what? this has actually become the greatest blessing. It's literally the best part of our move so far, and it was the part that I had been least excited about, is moving to this neighborhood. So yeah, right off the bat, we just met the most hospitable neighbors, found community almost instantly, and just felt so welcomed. And we wouldn't have had that had we not moved to, I mean, maybe we would have had that in another neighborhood, but had we moved, to property or something like that, I just feel like it would have been so much harder to form that community, at least, not as quickly. So anyways, my point is this, that sometimes God calls us to incredibly difficult callings in life. And I'm not saying that this is incredibly difficult, the move that we made or whatever. My point is just that God can use those things that seem very difficult or burdensome to you to become the greatest blessing. And motherhood works in the same way. The moments that expose your worst self, the impatience or the fear or the doubt or your trauma responses, are often the very places that God intends to heal you. So slowly through each act of surrender, He restores trust. Trust in Him, trust in others, and trust in your own ability to navigate life's challenges. Every uncomfortable moment, every act of obedience becomes a doorway to deeper freedom and a restored heart. So like in my situation, after meeting our neighbors and feeling the blessing in a place that I had dreaded, I realized something. Sometimes God calls us into discomfort not to punish us, but to give us something we didn't even know we needed. For me, in this scenario, it was a close community that I could lean on in this new home, this new location of ours. And that same principle applies to the deepest wounds of our heart, the shame we carry from past failures or trauma. Just as God used surrender to restore trust in my move, He uses His grace to heal the shame that tries to define us. So for years, I said, this is just who I am. I'm an anxious person, or I'm just kind of an angry person. But the day that I stopped defending this dysfunction and I started asking God, who do you say I am, was the day that everything changed for me. We aren't slaves to our thoughts. We are stewards of them. And that shift from identifying with my trauma to identifying with Christ was what rewired my brain and my motherhood and my whole life. Because when Christ sets you free, you are free indeed. I used to believe that I was defined by my flaws and my trauma, but God showed me that in Him, I'm a new creation, not bound by my past. As a mother, grace is your survival. It's what carries you from the morning rush to the nightly collapse. I remember being in a season where I thought, I cannot do this for one more second, let alone several more years until my child goes to school. And then I would. Not because I found new strength, but because God met me in my weakness. He became my strength. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens day by day, moment by moment, and His grace fills the cracks of your weakness. Sometimes healing doesn't come from escaping the hard moments. It comes through finding gratitude, even in the very trenches you wanted to get out of. For example, like smelling your baby's hair while rocking him to sleep during their 4th nighttime feeding when all you want to do is go to sleep. Or, focusing on the cute way that your toddler mispronounces a word when they are annoyingly repeating the same question over and over and over again. Just in the ordinary, messy, chaotic rhythms of life. God's grace shows up, and you can choose to embrace it because His strength is made perfect in our weakness, as it's written in 2 Corinthians 12:9. Motherhood isn't just about raising children, it's about letting God shape and grow us along the way too. In the messy, exhausting, joyful moments, He rewrites our hearts, He restores trust, He heals our shame, and He teaches us to love more fully. The wounds of the past don't have to define the next generation because His grace meets us right where we are. So if you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or anxious in motherhood, remember, He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus. Philippians 1:6. So if you feel like you're stuck in survival mode and your past keeps creeping into your motherhood, it's not too late. You can be free. I walk through the exact system that God used to heal me in my free workshop. So you can join anytime. The link is in the description below. And if you're interested in how I escaped survival mode as a mother who was constantly overstimulated and angry, watch this next video.